Hello, everyone. Welcome back to season 3 of the Artisan podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Rachel Cooke to our session here today and really talk about the employee experience and why it is so impactful for both engagement as well as retention in our companies. Welcome, Rachel. So happy to have you here and really excited to talk to you about this incredibly impactful journey that our employees go through and that we go through as business owners and as managers of our teams.
We do. I'm delighted to be here, Katty. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So I had the pleasure of hearing and meeting Rachel at the Association of Talent Development Conference in San Diego. And we've been talking about having her on here so we can really talk about the why of this amazing initiative, as well as really the road trip that Rachel refers to when she talks about the employee experience. So why don't we start there? Let's talk about this journey, this road trip that we're on.
That's awesome. You have such a good memory, Katty. I do love a good metaphor when I talk about these things. I use the road trip metaphor. You could pick many, but I think sometimes something like the employee experience can feel very kind of cloudy and ethereal, and nobody quite knows how to wrap their hands around it. And so, I like to say that the employee experience really is a journey. And I think about a road trip, and it has really these 3 core elements. In order to take a successful road trip, you need a destination. You need to understand where you are going. You need a roadmap. You need some turn-by-turn directions. And then hopefully you've got some fuel in the tank. And if you're lucky, some snacks and a playlist, but something to sort of fuel you or give momentum to your journey. That's how I like to think about it.
I love that. I love that. Can we start at the beginning of that employee experience? Obviously, we're in the recruitment space here at Artisan Creative, and I sometimes get this impression that the employee experience for some companies starts after the onboarding, but we see that employee experience almost like candidate experience, if you will, that starts even prior to being hired. How the interview is conducted, how they're being responded to during that whole application process. So maybe it's the pre-journey of the journey, right? The conversation in that state. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I see your pre-candidate experience, and I would say it goes back even further with that, which is the experience that your existing employees are having within your organization, such that they are going to be ambassadors of and successful recruiters of that talent to whom you want to deliver that amazing candidate experience. So I do think it is always an ongoing and continuous. I think, fundamentally for me, Katty, what stands out about the employee experience, and where I think a lot of well-intentioned and well-meaning companies are getting it wrong, is that I think companies have a tendency to think about the work that we're doing and then the employee experience that we think about later when we have free time, which spoiler, we never have free time. And I always like to say that I believe that a really powerful employee experience is one that fuels rather than follows the real work. Right. I think employee experience is not about free food and foosball tables and sort of fancy cocktail parties. It begins with the ways in which we actually enable our employees to deliver the work that we have hired them to do. And I think that resonates even in the interview process, even in the recruitment process. I see organizations posting roles and then running these potential candidates through the ringer with really complex application processes. You've got applicant tracking systems. You've got recruiters that have this as number 17 on the priority list, and people are, interviewing with 27 different people and then waiting months and months. And frankly, in a buyer's market, which we may not be in right now, but we will be in again, that's a really off-putting experience for somebody to have. And so for me, the fundamental first question is, what can we be doing as organizations to just streamline and simplify how we are finding and attracting and recruiting top talent? Where can we strip out some of the noise? Because I guarantee there is plenty in there.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. I actually recorded a little mini a session on that the whole interviewing journey. And that's what I talked about is sometimes our intent as a company is to make sure all stakeholders are involved, make sure everybody has a voice, everybody has had the chance to meet the new candidate, the new prospect, if you will. But the implication of that is a very different, how it lands on someone could be very different. And sometimes we don't look at that side of it as to how is my 6-step interview process and assessment and this and that actually reflecting on us as a company, which is an important
I
piece.
could not agree more. You might recall that in the presentation I gave at ATD, I talk about these 4 pillars of the employee experience, which are very much about asking the question, what are we as an organization doing to enable our teams to effectively deliver, develop, connect, and thrive? To me, when we get those things right, we are both fueling work results and outcomes, and we are effectively engaging our employees. And so in that parlance, Katty, going back to this recruitment experience, in a recruitment engagement, our goal is to find top talent and bring them into the organization, right? And so what we should be asking as an organization is, if we want our existing talent to do, our internal recruiters, our hiring leaders, what we need them to deliver in this context is top talent to our organization. We need to be asking questions around what can we do to help them deliver that result more effectively. And often it is stripping out extra voices, extra process steps, extra approvals. It is streamlining the process. It is getting to the heart of the matter. It's not having 17 different people ask this person the same, 25 questions. And so when we're thinking about all of our work, all of the pieces of the employee lifecycle through this lens of how do we help people deliver, develop, connect, and thrive, that first question is deliver. And so I think in so many recruiting processes, we have all of these extra steps and overwrought decision-making processes and approvals. And, we have 17 different systems that need to talk to each other. And we have made it so much harder for our internal recruiters to actually deliver, which means find the candidate and bring them in. How do we simplify it? How do we streamline it? How do we empower the right people to get it done quickly and effectively?
I love that. I love that. Can you kind of just dive in a little bit more into each of those steps and what could a company, as they're trying to embrace this newer way of, or enhance, not necessarily embrace, but enhance their employee experience? What can they do in the deliver stage and the development stage and the connect stage and the thrive stage that really would deliver that?
Yeah. So when you and I were at the ATD conference, we had the good fortune of watching a keynote delivered by Adam Grant, who is a tremendously renowned organizational psychologist and leadership researcher and speaker. And something he said that really resonated with me is that in the current environment that we're in, the number one most critical leadership capability. Do you remember what he said? I'm gonna reveal it.
Please reveal it, because I'm
Yes.
drawing a blank.
So he said it's not intelligence, it's not charisma, it's not vision, it's not all these things. The number one most critical leadership capability that any leader needs today is agility, right? It's
Oh,
the
yes.
ability to quickly pivot, to see what's happening in the moment and be able to flex. And that really resonated with me because that very much aligns to the way that I think about the employee experience. I think that what's happening is that organizations are looking for those best practices out there. What are the experts saying we should do around development? What are the experts saying we should be doing to drive connection? And really what it means, the way that I think about it is the best way to enable your employees to deliver their best results, their best impact, the best way to get them to develop new skills and to feel invested in and grown and coached. The best way to help them connect, whether you are hybrid or remote, the best way to help them connect with each other, with customer, with purpose. And finally, the best ways to help them thrive, which to me is about feeling well and balanced and whole, is you've got to understand where they are today and where they need to be. And I think where so many people are seeking those external best practices, what they really need to be doing is seeking the expertise of their internal experts, which are their teams, their employees. And so when I run an employee experience audit with a company, what I don't do is come in and tell them what to do. What I do is I come in, I help them understand this framework. Why are these the 4 pillars? And we talk about some data around why deliver, develop, connect, and thrive are so important. But the expertise that I really bring is in the asking and the facilitating and the synthesizing. So my expertise is not in the ideas or the tactics. My expertise is in the framing and the asking and soliciting ideas from employees so that I can come back to a leadership team and say, here's how well your employees are currently able to deliver, develop, connect, and thrive. Here are some of your blind spots, your opportunity areas. We're going to assume positive intent. You mean to do well, but here's a place where people are struggling to deliver because they're struggling to access this system, or these types of decisions take too long to make, right? Or in the develop bucket, you've got a million courses in your learning management system, but nobody can find time to do learning, or there's not a culture of coaching. And so let's talk about upskilling your leaders. It's really about, so my expertise and the value I bring to an organization is really tapping into the wisdom that they're sitting on and they don't even realize it. And when an organization can open their ears and be really agile and say, okay, whatever our employees need in the moment, that's what we're going to do. That's where we're going to leverage that Adam Grant wisdom. That's where I see the employee experience start to shift quickly and meaningfully.
Love that. And I should have known that because agility is one of our core values at Artisan, but the word was just out of my mind. So
You're
thank you
doing
so
it
much.
so organically, you don't even think about it.
Very
It's all
good.
good.
That must be it. That must be it. Uh, but thank you for saying that because you're absolutely right. We forget that it's sometimes those little things that may seem little, and oh, we'll get to it later, that actually impact what that experience is. Not being able to have your different technology pieces talk to each other, having to do 10 steps to do something that could only take 2 steps in reality, and so forth. So I love this this notion that every organization has his own potential and his own opportunity bucket, and you go in there and you can find out what that is. And I would imagine part of that whole component of that employee experience also is how much do they feel heard and seen and belonging, and that whole component of that teamwork would play in profoundly in that.
Absolutely. And, I find, Katty, that so often I'm going into organizations that have these really robust employee engagement surveys that they run once a year, and then they get all the data and they spend months, crunching and analyzing and slicing and dicing. And from the employee perspective, they're like, I took this survey 3 months ago. I haven't heard squat. Clearly, my voice doesn't matter. I'm not going to waste my time doing next year's survey. Whereas with these employee experience pulse checks, I call them, it is fast. I go in, I run these focus groups, and we turn around results within a week. And we deliver a set of actions, recommended actions that are small, that don't need lots of dollars and lots of approvals. Tweaks like, you know what? Let's experiment. It's a series of experiments. Let's try making all of our new meeting default is now 45 minutes versus 60. Or we don't do meetings on Fridays, right? Or let's experiment with, instead of me, the leader, always running our team meetings, we're going to take turns, running them, because people want an opportunity to have that leadership experience. We look for these small, quick to implement experiments that we can run, and we run them through the language of employee experience. So we invite employees into these focus groups, we capture their ideas, we report it out quickly. And then as we start implementing ideas, we say, we're doing this, we're changing our meeting times, we're changing how we run meetings because of your voice, because of your input, it mattered. And so employees feel, they feel heard and they feel valued. And so, one of the conversations I love having with clients is when I run these pulse checks and I sit down with the client and I report out the results, and the client says, well, where do we start? I love to be able to say, you already have. You've already started, right? Just through the action of asking these questions, not in a survey where people are filling out boxes and, it's very static. To really solicit action-oriented intelligence, you want to invite people into a dialogue. And by inviting them into a dialogue and just letting them ventilate, letting them get their voices heard, letting them say, oh my God, thank you for asking. I have spent 27 hours over the past year, like wrangling this process when it could be so much cleaner, but nobody's asked, right? And
Mhm.
just by asking and listening and playing it back to them, you've already started the journey. You've already given them that space. You've invited them in and you've heard them. You're already past the finish line. And I find that clients kind of get excited about that. Ooh,
Mhm.
we're already at step 2. That's fabulous. Let's keep going.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. And there's so much wisdom in what you're saying, because sometimes just because we've done things a certain way all along doesn't mean there's not an opportunity to make a change. And just hearing that coming from somebody else's voice is so impactful. Some people see things differently, so why not listen to that, right?
Absolutely. And these are the people executing the processes. These are the people who are engaging with your customers or engaging with your candidates. They're the ones who see and feel the pain points.
Yeah.
So their inputs matter more than anyone's.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Which brings me to the development component of your 4 pillars. And you talk often about career development and just that internal mobility, and just having this opportunity to have your voice heard and really showcase what you're capable of is a great opportunity to hopefully advance within your team, advance within your company. And when it comes to the recruitment phase, bringing it back to that, I often ask our clients, like, have you looked within? Like, is there anyone on your team that can do this, or you can train, or like, is there an opportunity for that before we start looking outside? Because that's the last thing I want, honestly, is to be looking outside and then somebody internally not being recognized, or
Yeah.
at the 11th hour the client saying, oh, we found somebody internal. Well, let's have that
Mhm.
conversation ahead of the game.
Absolutely. I think, one thing that I experience with organizations, and I am not a recruitment expert, but I did used to work as an HR business partner. And so I partnered with recruitment. And one of the things that I always found with my business partners was they would put together, a job description or a job rec, and there would be like 17 required skills.
Yes.
And I'm like, do you really, like, for the person who's going to do this job, if you had to prioritize these 17 required skills and rank them 1 through 17, can you do that? And they would do that. And I would say, let's look at numbers 13 through 17. What if somebody didn't have those? Could they still be successful at that job? And the answer was almost always yes. And then I would say, well, what about numbers 9 through 13? I think as leaders, we have a tendency to write these job descriptions, and like the fantasy person would be amazing at absolutely
Yes.
everything. When the reality is, we need to be more discerning as leaders and as hiring leaders around what fundamentally does this person absolutely need to be able to do on day one? Where can we leverage somebody may have less, let's say, technical capability, but they've been within our organization for 3 years and they know how things work and they get our culture and they have relationships with our clients. How do we think about weighting the value of those things relative to an expertise in XYZ system, right? Because
Absolutely.
that stuff is trainable, but this 3 years worth of interior knowledge and understanding of how to get things done, that just takes 3 years. You can't quickly onboard somebody to that. And so I do love to challenge organizations to think a little bit more differently and openly around what is really required and what is maybe the value of some of your internal candidates that you are taking for granted, and where can we start to weigh the value of what somebody internal brings versus somebody external.
I love that. We are so aligned on that. I often talk about what are the must-have skills and what are the
Yes.
nice-to-haves. The
Yes.
nice-to-haves are great to have, but are they a deal breaker? If they're
Almost
not,
never.
yeah. If they're not, let's somehow distinguish them on that job description. Um, and say also the hard skills versus the soft skills.
Right.
The EQ piece of it is so important. What if somebody had all the technical skills but didn't have any of the soft skills that you're looking for? They didn't have the communication skills, didn't have the leadership skills, didn't have the teamwork mindset. Like all of those things are almost even more important because you can teach the technical component if needed. But
Absolutely. And not to
yeah.
mention, and I don't want to take us too far on a tangent, but there's a ton of data out there, and I'm sure you've seen it, that shows statistically a woman is much less likely to apply for a job unless she possesses 100% of the skills listed. Whereas a man, statistically, pretty much he just needs 3 and he's going to go for it, right? And so we are unwittingly limiting our talent pool and frankly limiting our ability
Mm.
to build pipelines of women leaders, which I think a lot of organizations are focusing on right now. The more skills we required, the more heavily we're going to weight our applicant pool towards men versus women. And I think that's something we just need to be aware of.
Very valid point. Thank you for bringing that up for sure. Can we go and talk about something that I remember from your conversation is filtering out the ins. Can you talk a little bit
Yes.
about that and what that was in
Yes.
greater detail?
Absolutely. So, I think that part of what confuses people about the employee experience, like I was saying earlier, I think it can feel kind of like everything, right? Like, what isn't the employee experience? And for me, the question to be asking isn't what is and what isn't the employee experience. A better question to ask is, where can we really have impact on the employee experience? And so I talk about filtering out the 4 ins, and I'll tell you what they are in just a second. But for me, the 4 ins are areas that do touch the employee experience, but they are not where we get the bang for our buck. And so I like to filter them out so that we
Okay.
can focus on where we really do get impact. And so those 4 ins, the first one is what I call the intangible. And that really is your organizational culture. And I think of organizational culture like the weather. It's like the climate. It touches us, it impacts the choices that we make, but it takes many, many actions over long stretches of time to shift the weather, to shift the climate, to shift organizational culture. So
Okay.
it matters, but it's not where we get impact. So I filter it out. The second in that I filter out is what I call the inaccessible. And these are things like your compensation philosophy, the location or the layout of your physical building. They are things that, again, impact our employee experience, but they are only informed by decisions made at the very top of your organization, right?
Okay.
Most leaders in most organizations are not able to influence your comp philosophy, your physical location. So again, not a lot of bang from your buck when only C-level executives can touch it. So we filter it out. We filter out the intangible and we filter out the inaccessible. The third that I filter out is what I call the indelible or the unerasable. And these are things that I consider table stakes. Things like having fair market rate compensation, having basic policies that keep people feeling safe, having an equitable approach to leading your workforce. These are the things that if you get them right, they're invisible. They're not winning you any contest. But if you get them wrong, they're going to destroy your employee experience.
Mm-hmm.
So just get them to baseline and then nobody wins the employee experience contest by having fair and equitable policies, right? So that's the third one, the indelible. And then the fourth one I adorably call the in case you have money to burn. And these are what I think of as like the sexy extras. These are the free food and the foosball tables and the fancy holiday parties. And I call these the sizzle and fizzle. So they're like a sugar rush to your employee experience. They're exciting, they're fun, and then we acclimate, right? They're not the things that really drive our experience. So when you filter out the intangible, which is culture, the inaccessible, which are those things only decided by the top, the indelible, which are your hygiene factors or your table stakes, and then your in case you have money to burn or your sexy extras, you filter those out. Where you're left is focusing on creating the conditions that allow us to deliver, develop, connect, and thrive. And that's how I get there. We've taken the road trip backwards, but I still love it.
Yeah, no, I do love it. Well, sometimes when you're on the road trip, you got to make sure that you didn't take a turn in the wrong direction.
Totally. We're checking the rear view. Absolutely.
Yeah, and making sure that our Google Maps is connected to the satellite still.
Absolutely.
How's that for just taking that analogy and just running with it?
I love it. I love what you did there.
So how would you encourage a management team to start looking at this puzzle piece? For
Mhm.
some companies, it is a puzzle piece. They may not even know where to start. And
Absolutely.
also, I would say there's a macro and a micro. There's the employee experience from a organization standpoint, but also really looking at each individual team and how that team lead is leading that experience within that. So how would you say, for someone who's never done this before, maybe they don't even have an onboarding program, which is another conversation for another day, we can talk about that, but how would they even begin this process?
So I believe that the process genuinely begins with education and alignment. So I go into a number of organizations and I'll talk to a handful of senior leaders, and each one has a completely different definition of what the employee experience is or what matters. And so I think it begins with just bringing a leadership team together, having a conversation, providing an education on why these four pillars, right? What's the data behind why these are the four that matter?
Mhm.
And what do they mean, right? What are the things when we think about what helps organizations deliver? We think about things like, do we have the right number of priorities? Do we have alignment? Do we have tools and resources? Do we have obstacles being stripped out, right? When we think about what helps teams develop, do we have a culture of coaching? Do we know how to give feedback? Do we have on the job experiences? Do we have peer mentors, right? So bringing a leadership team together, giving them the language of deliver, develop, connect, and thrive, and just helping them understand what are some of those bullets underneath each of these pillars. I think it starts there because you cannot move an employee experience until you begin by just understanding what constitutes it. So I always begin there. A lot of my engagements will begin with a keynote or an interactive workshop with a leadership team just to start to build that language. And from there, I love to encourage a leadership team or senior leaders to just start using that language within the organization. Because again, you've got employees walking around going, well, I think the employee experience at Google is better because they do free food. And what I think is important is that leadership teams start to talk about the employee experience through the lens of we want to fuel and not follow the real work. So it begins with conversations. From there, I think the next step is just a little bit of observation. Once we start thinking about the employee experience through the lens of deliver, develop, connect, and thrive, it helps us to put on a filter where suddenly now we can start to spot, oh, you know what? I recognize as the senior leader, I've been sitting on this decision for 3 weeks. And I'm now realizing there are 17 people in this organization who have not been able to get anything done because I'm sitting with this thing on my desk, right? It helps us just to start to notice some of these opportunities. So I think that that's really where it begins. At a macro perspective, I think the executive leader's job is to have this language, have this awareness, start to talk about it, start to cascade it down to their leaders and start to infuse it in the organization. I think you're right, Caddy, that there are things that need to happen at the team level as well, because a lot of times, what's keeping the marketing team from being able to deliver is very different from what's holding back the HR team, the recruiting team, the finance team. And so giving leaders at the function or team level some tools and some skills around what are some questions you can be asking your team to solicit their ideas. How can you facilitate candid dialogue such that your employees will don't just have the ideas but actually feel safe in
Mhm.
offering them and speaking up? How can you as a leader at that level start to implement experiments and have a sense to know if it's working or if it's not working, what's working well, and how do we continue this? I also love to talk about starting to infuse practice sharing conversations. So over time, bringing leaders of different functions or teams together to
Mhm.
share strategies. Oh, I tried this with my team and it worked incredibly well. Maybe you want to try this with your team. So I think it's a very organic process. And this is why I call it a road trip. It's not a project. It doesn't have, you know, it's not a 1 month thing.
Mhm.
It is a journey, right? It is always kind of ongoing, but you have to have clarity of that North Star and then invite your team to help you inform the roadmap or build the steps.
Love it. And sometimes it's not a straight line. There are
Oh,
bumps in
it's
the road
almost
and there's
there.
some curves and so forth. So a final question and a big one.
Yeah.
And that has to do with a hybrid workforce.
Yeah.
And this, you know, the we have to admit, work has changed. My company's been remote for 12 years, so having a remote workforce is a normal thing. We come together and we build culture, probably more focused, intentional culture building because we are remote.
Mhm.
But now we're in the space of people wanting people back in the office and or trying to navigate the whole hybrid space. Can we talk about the employee experience as it relates to the remote and or the hybrid workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is no doubt that things have changed significantly. And I don't believe anybody has cracked the nut on this yet. I think we've learned a lot. I think we still have a lot more to learn. I love to tell people one of the things I like to do in my free time is go hiking, and very gently. I like a gentle hike. Um, and I know, sometimes you go to a public park and you will see a sign that says something like uh, $500 fine for littering, be warned, right? And then other times you'll see a sign that says, please help keep our park clean, take your trash out with you. And at the end of the day, those both drive the same behavior in me. Either way, I am going to throw out my trash and not litter. But in that first example, that sort of threat-based example, it almost makes me want to revolt. It's almost like, well, can I sneak a piece of trash in there? Because they were so, don't don't talk to me that way. Like, I'm a grown up, right? But when you invite me to be a part of something bigger, you invite me to be one of the many who are keeping this beautiful public space clean, like that inspires me, that excites me. And I think about that principle in the way that we are bringing our teams together. I think too many organizations, in my opinion and in my experience, are going with the must be in the office 3 days a week, or everyone's in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which to me is sort of like that don't litter or we'll fine you sign. Because people resent it, right? When you are threatened, when you are forced, when you are compelled, the human reaction, the human gut reaction is no, no,
Mm.
don't tell me what to do. And I think companies are, without purpose, forcing people to do a thing that is backfiring, right? I'm not focused on keeping the park clean. I am focused on how angry I am at that sign.
Mm.
What organizations want to be doing is actually driving engagement and driving in connection. And by forcing people into an office, I think it's having the opposite effect. What I'm really encouraging leadership teams to do is to be really thoughtful about, rather than Tuesdays and Thursdays, infuse purpose into those days. How about people come in when we're bringing customers in, or people come in when there's a big brainstorming day, or people come in when we're doing a leadership offsite or a learning event. When we infuse a sense of purpose and we're
Mm.
all in this together into bringing people physically into an office, I think that can be so much more powerful. I think forcing people's hands is not the way to do it. I also think when we are, I just ran a meeting a couple of weeks ago. It was a 25-person leadership team. 50% of those people were physically together, including me. 50% were remote. And I was, now granted, I am a facilitator, so this is what I do for a living. And I understand not every leader has the ability to be so
Mm.
thoughtful, but I was really thoughtful in how I designed that experience such that we made it feel as much as possible like everybody had an equivalent experience of that day. And so I think the more thoughtful we can be when we're
Yeah.
operating in a hybrid way, to make sure that we're not doing exercises where half the people see things on the wall and half the people don't, right? To make sure that we are leveraging that virtual technology. I actually had people buddy up. So everybody who was participating remotely had a buddy in the room, and that was just their point of contact. And so if somebody participating remotely had an idea but couldn't raise their hand or couldn't hear something, they would ping their buddy would ping me. That's just one tactic. But I
Mm.
think being thoughtful about how do we equalize the experience when we are operating remotely and not make people feel like first and second class citizens based on where they're participating. These are just some of the things I have started to pick up along the way.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the buddy system quite a bit because sometimes you may forget the person who's on
Yeah.
screen or not, they don't realize they're on mute and they're trying to say something and it's just not working. So I really appreciate the
Absolutely.
buddy system. Thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure.
So Rachel, as we wrap up, would love, I know you talked a little bit about kind of your expertise and what you bring to the table, but can you talk about lead above noise and how it came to be, and just really where you see yourself kind of just growing in your own practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started Lead Above Noise in 2015. And I named the organization because I had worked for many years as a HR practitioner in big corporate America. And I found that as organizations, we just keep throwing more and more stuff at leaders. And it feels like a leader's job is to somehow juggle more and more. Whereas I believe that the crux of being an effective leader, being a successful organization is really about understanding how to filter out all the noise and understand what to really focus on. And it's so hard. It's so hard to say no to the things that aren't really going to fuel you forward. And yet I think it's one of the most important things that we can do as leaders. I really truly believe that the most successful organizations in the world, I don't care how good your product or service is, your organization will only ever be as strong as the talent you've hired to deliver your products and services. And so by investing in your talent, by understanding their experiences, by developing your leaders, I think that is truly the secret to success. And so that is what we specialize in Lead Above Noise. We focus on employee experience. I do keynotes and we run these audits within organizations to help them build these action plans. And then I also run a group coaching program for leaders, which is called Simple, which is an acronym. And that really focuses on building what I believe are kind of the 6 core skills, the 6 foundational skills. You used the phrase earlier, the must have and the nice to have. I think especially when people are stepping into new leadership roles, they're trying to boil the ocean, they're trying to learn everything. And I think I run this cohort-based program that really helps leaders understand what they need most critically, start by building those skills and get really comfortable, confident, and then they can add other skills on over time. So that's really where I spend my time.
I love it. And there's a through line in everything that you've said, wrapping it up with simple. Pretty much everything you've said, from when we were talking about the job description, taking things out of the job descriptions that aren't necessary, the 4 ins, the ins that you were talking about, taking those out of filtering them out. And then with the leadership that you just spoke about is, just let's focus, let's simplify it. Let's just really get to the core of what it is that we need to do. So thank you for that.
There is so much noise around us. And
so much noise.
It's really hard, but yeah, we've got to keep filtering.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with our audience.
I loved this conversation. Again, thank you for the invitation. It was so great chatting.
Absolutely.